Welcome to Critical Line Item. My name's Tom Ramblick, and we've got this little thing called the budget coming up next week. So, I want to do a bit of a preview for you this particular podcast with Lisa Gregg, our tax expert and tax guru, who'll understand better than some of us, possibly including me, what the fringe benefits tax ideas that have been floated in the press over the past day or so actually mean. Because not everybody understands it. It sounds good, but is it really good for you? Lisa, thanks for joining me, and I'm hoping you can explain what the heck is going on here.
Oh, Tom, thank you so much for having me back. And I don't know if in these unprecedented times, yes, we hate that word, we can explain anything at the moment. So we'll see how our conversation goes. How about that one? I won't make no promises.
Okay, carry on. Now, what have you noticed about the FBT things? There's some talk of trying to give small businesses the a bit of relief so they can actually buy their staff, laptops and whatever else, um, without having to pay FBT on the stuff. Uh,
Yeah, it's been it's always interesting, and we've had previous conversations about the sound bites we get on breakfast TV and things like that as well. And everyone's going, small business is exempt from FBT, and we just go, just hold your horses. The devil's in the detail. And look, all my clients are in the small end of town. All bar one or two of my clients basically already get these FBT exemptions, because these exemptions that they're talking about for portable electronic devices, let's call it. So we're talking about our various smartphones and computers and tablets and those sort of things. Anyone who is a small business less than 10 mil basically gets these anyway, Tom. So all they've done is level up the definition of what a small business is to $50 million. So we've seen what the value of this incentive will be, and that's what it's all about. What I'm disappointed about, given that we do need to stimulate the economy after we work out what COVID normal looks like, is the big one that's been promoted about what could really benefit would be the removal of fringe benefits tax on what we call meal entertainment. And that's where we go out for our, if I can use the word, pissy long lunch that we used to have before FBT came about, and that would then incentivize employees to make them happy because they feel like they're getting something for nothing. And secondly, it'll help the hospitality industry that is extremely suffering in the land of COVID. And I think all hospitality nationwide is suffering, not just us stuck in quasi lockdown Melbourne.
you're right, and look, it would be interesting to see how those FBT exemptions play out, particularly with hospitality. We've seen countless cases of the hospitality industry thumping the table and saying, "Hurry up! We need to get out there. We need to do what we need to do to make a quid." Um, and Dan Andrews down here has said, "Not yet. We haven't got down to the magic number of five or whatever it is. Um, we're getting there slowly, but we're not there yet."
Oh yeah, and I mean, what's talking about with hospitality as well is, you and I both know that they're talking about having outdoor venues and laneways and things like that, and I'm just going, does anyone know about what Melbourne weather's like, and
Well, the only
mosquitoes and everything? I'm just going,
but
it's not conducive to al frescoing at the best of times, Melbourne. You need Plan B for any party that you organise.
well, the issue with eating outside as well, and possibly with this lockdown, is that the, the the end of the lockdown will probably come when we do have finer weather, and people might want to eat outside, right?
Well,
Not that I'm trying to.
yeah,
Not that
but
I'm
but you
trying to.
can't guarantee it, Tom. Like, if you're betting on an outdoor party, an outdoor wedding, an outdoor whatever, you really always need a plan B for Melbourne, as we know. I mean, just think back to well, compare this weekend that we're coming into to last weekend. Last weekend would have been roundabout grand final weekend. It was freezing on Saturday and it would have been a disaster. This weekend it's 25 degrees and there goes social distancing on our beaches tonight because it's actually quite a lovely day. So you can't, as 4 seasons in one day. We're both Melburnians. We know this. You can't bet on Melbourne weather. You're going to always be entertained by it.
Yeah.
Right? But this
Hold
is
on.
where
Hold on. I'll just jump
so
on the website for Bet365 and see whether they've got a book running on the Melbourne weather.
well, let's put it this way, right? Sutto, as we're calling him, because we all know and love him now, or I don't know if we love him, but we all know who I'm talking about. He basically made this claim about finally the cases are less than the temperature in Melbourne today, and I've just gone, well, that just shows you putting the two things that are on top of mind of Melburnians: the number of cases a day and what's the temperature going to be. So yeah, it is what it is, Tom. But all flippancy aside, fringe benefits tax, if they really want to, if the government really want to incentivise and use it as a promotion, I mean, getting rid of meal entertainment so we can actually incentivise employees without having the burden of a 47% FBT tax. I've just said a ATM machine, a fringe benefits tax, is the way to go. Because if you look at anyone's impost on fringe benefits tax, the two biggies are basically meal entertainment that people are aware of and car fringe benefits. The car parking one is fairly a small amount that causes grief for employers at the level that we're talking about. So they're talking about moving it from $10 million turnover to $50 million turnover. It's not huge. What you're really looking at in those cases are anyone that has employment at like airports and things like that, and that's who gets caught up with fringe benefits tax on car parking. And yeah, meal entertainment is basically anyone that takes employees out for any sort of sustenance, I'll call it.
Well, if we look at another issue that you and I both sat down and sort of mauled to death over a period of time, which is FBT um, returns get lodged early in the year. There's a lot of paperwork involved with FBT. How much relief is not having to sort of pay FBT on some of these things going to give people?
Well, this is what I'm sort of saying is that what they're talking about is the portable electronic devices, and I think car parking are the two that's been reported in the media. I know we do have to wait till Tuesday night budget night, but that's what's reported. As they're not a huge one, right? As I said, so it's not really going to be that. It's not going to be that much less burden by doing that. As I said, the ones to get rid of are meal entertainment and car fringe benefits. They're the ones that really burden and everyone's very aware of. And if you talk to FBT experts out there as well, it's meant, how can I say, it's quite a complex part of the tax law, and it's not as well understood as income tax and GST. So it sort of gets a little bit lost in the complexity of our tax system. The experts say that many organisations and even many bigger firms don't get it right as well. So it is a huge, fringe benefits tax is one of the huge burdens that makes it very difficult for us to comply with, if I can put it that way. Even with our best endeavours, it's very easy to make errors.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma because you sit back and you look at it and say, well, okay, so where do you take this? Um, where do you move it? Where do you? How do you reform something? In fact, this isn't a what they're doing on FBT really wouldn't be classed as a reform. It's just a fiddling with a particular rate and categories.
Oh, it is, Tom, and that's what's frustrating for us practitioners, but also it keeps us in a job, if you want to call it that. It's all the tweaks of the tax system. Well, like we've got some fundamental tax rules that apply pretty much globally, and then in the Australian system, it just gets layer on layer of complexity that then makes it quite frustrating. And you've got to every time you go and do something, you've got to go, now what is the definition of small business? Because there's about 8 of them, right? So if the government was really serious about lessening the burden and stimulating the economy, they would have said, okay, for all businesses under, well, these exemptions, we're talking about moving, as I said, the dial from 10 mil to 50 mil. If they said, look, all businesses under the $2 million turnover or $5 million turnover, just pick a number that's pretty small for small business. They don't need to worry about FBT at all, right? That's what we were looking for. So no FBT or meal entertainment. Let everyone have their company car, in working for them as well, right? And then it just takes the whole burden away. And what's the real mischief there? It's not arduous for those small sort of businesses.
Well, there's something sort of interesting in what you've just said about definitions, because I look at the Corporations Act and it tells me something different about small and large proprietary companies, and then you go elsewhere and you start to see other definitions of small business. Now, it's not a particularly comfortable area to be looking at, and then to have conversations with people who just want to get on and do stuff about the fact that there are several different labels called small business that pop up
Oh,
all over the place.
absolutely, Tom. And where it becomes more of a concern as well is for all the different levels of small business and the way that we apply the laws in those cases. You could be a business that could be up and down along a threshold somewhere, okay? And so you're in one time and out another time. I mean, the biggest example I can give is probably the corporate tax rate, the company tax rate that's been changing. And what they do is they've been changing the company tax rate from 30 all the way, now it's getting talked about going down to 25, and then they're changing the level of turnover where that applies. So you could find yourself flip flopping and go, well, hang on, at the start of the year, you might not be sure what tax rate you're going to apply. And you just
Yeah.
go, what the? And then overlaying COVID on top of it, if a company is really struggling, we're talking about for JobKeeper, that 30% downturn, which has been the benchmark of you're not doing too well, that could drop you down into different tax rates or different exemptions or different deductions that you can have for depreciation and everything. It's just becoming such a mosaic of complexity. The matrix is, somewhere, in the fifth dimension at the moment with what you've got to think about. And the more complexity adds to more errors, which means that there's a more chance that if you get audited, even in your best endeavors, you could have done something wrong because there's just so much to cover off, and they're changing all the time. I mean, even when you talk about it now, the treasurer's mentioned that for small business, one definition of small business, the corporate tax rate for the year we're in is now 26%, but the legislation hasn't passed yet. So you've got all these small business going, well, what am I paying tax on? Am I paying at 27.5 cents or 26 cents in the dollar at the moment? Because we're not sure. So this indecision doesn't assist us.
No, it doesn't, and it creates greater um, confusion, a greater state of opaqueness, and it's not particularly edifying when you've got to explain to people there are multiple definitions of small business, and you really need to talk to an expert, as we continuously say, um, in order to get it right. Now, there's something else that kind of cropped up during the week, and it's probably related to the budget, but not necessarily about the taxpayers or COVID. But we had the audit office be reported as facing, like, let's say, it's no budget increase, which is kind of a problem if you're in the business of transparency and openness at government level, isn't it?
What, that you need more funding to do your job?
Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it, with what gets funded and what doesn't get funded. I heard someone talk about on the TV saying it's adequately funded, and that was referring to the ABC. So, we'll just leave it at, you need the resourcing to be able to do the job. Let's bring it back to something a little bit more that I'm aware of, but we know that to with the Australian Tax Office, they've seconded a lot of call centre operators, for want of a better term, from Services Australia and things like that to actually help with the COVID stimulus packages. So it's a matter of just juggling those things and redeploying people where the need is. So maybe that's what the audit office needs to do: redeploy people to be the most effective. Tom, maybe.
I think there's a few other issues there as well. Obviously, the audit office knows how to determine whether valuations of property are reasonable
Sorry.
or not, and then but they might not get around to looking at certain valuations of property if you don't give them sufficient funds to be able to include contentious little issues like paying more for land than
Dairy
you should have.
farms.
Yeah,
Hmm. Something about the dairy farms, I think you're probably getting at.
yeah,
Yeah.
there are dairy farms, and then there's the issue of sports grants, which kind of has gotten somewhat troublesome
Um,
by well, it's actually gotten troublesome not only at a federal level under a coalition administration, but also up in Queensland this week.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So there seems to be quite a bit of trouble across the board, I suppose. But at least probably none of our leaders have got COVID.
Well, no, they haven't, and I sort of haven't seen too many people calling it a hoax this afternoon. Um,
Interesting, isn't it? But
yeah,
look. All jokes aside, I think we've got to make sure that the scrutiny of the public service, in whatever role they've got, is adequately funded. And I think they need to look at make sure that the right qualifications and expertise are doing the right jobs, Tom. And that's probably doesn't matter whether it's public servants or in the corporate sector. That's what we'd expect of people doing a position.
yeah, there's that, and there's something else that came up which I thought we'd raise just as a completely oddball thing. I mean, we occasionally
Oh, I'm interested in this. What are you gonna throw at me now, Tom?
um, completely oddball thing. It I was rather curious today when we saw the the resident, sort of one of the two resident senators for One Nation up in Queensland issue a media release suggesting there's
Oh,
a need for a ministry for men. And I think, do we really need another department, another minister, another
yes.
bureaucratic overlay? Probably
Are you
not.
plugging in one of your old books again, Tom?
No, I'm not plugging that one. Rawton Ripoffs is coming out fairly shortly. It'll hit the
Not your Pauline Hanson one. Yeah.
well. No, that is long gone and
That ship's long
deleted.
sailed. Look, the Ministry of Men makes it sound a bit like Men's Gallery to me. That's when I read that, and I've just gone, really? It just sounds like a men's club, doesn't it? So,
Oh,
it's interesting. In a week or so where we've had three women that have impacted, I think, many females across Australia and the world, being RBG,
yeah, man, Helen Reddy.
Susan Ryan, and
Helen
Helen
Reddy.
Reddy. I thought it was probably not the greatest timing by the fair senator
No,
from
no, it
Queensland.
wasn't, and I suspect it was probably. My suspicion is it was probably a. It was probably one of those things where, I mean, it's written in the context of the family law inquiry, which she's deputy chair. I think she's
Mm,
still deputy chair, despite the fact that there's been a lot of contention about her chairing it. I I think it's a bit. It falls in the same category, Lisa, as that. Yeah, the attempt to get the parliament to agree on the use of what that phrase that emerged from sort of white supremacist trolling on 4chan in the US.
mm,
It's okay to be white.
mm.
So that I think it had certainly succeeded tonight, because I thought we'd raise it simply because of the fact that you've got a government department that's being underfunded. Then you've got somebody mucking about suggesting there ought to be a minister for men. And I just scratched my head wondering, why would you go there?
Well, we're talking about equality, aren't we? And I think some of what was mentioned in that presser was health related as well. So we've got to look at there are in these COVID times as well. Let's just call it out there. We've got mental health issues.
Yes,
And the suicide rate for males is well known throughout the time, and then we've also got the domestic violence aspect as well of that. So I would like to say that we're talking about equality and not necessarily male or female. We just want everything to be equal, and that's really where we're coming from with that, Tom. I think if you look at, as I said, as I mentioned to the three ladies that I mentioned a little bit earlier, RBG very much was into equality. One of her, she's made her mark on trying to have equality for males. That was one of her first cases that really earmarked her as being a great libertarian. So it's quite interesting that something like that would come out where you could say I'll have a minister for, I don't know, any different ethnicity, racial. We've had this conversation as well. That the categorization of things like that can be very detrimental.
yeah, and it can be pretty challenging. I mean, I've gone through some of that reading as part of studies I'm undertaking at the moment, and we there are parts of cultures around the world where they're blind to the detriment they cause to others when they articulate certain views. And I mean, they're not necessarily cultural, not necessarily based on ethnicity or race, but it can be anything. It can be political ideology. It can be
Hmm.
whatever
Yeah,
you
that's
turn to,
yeah,
and
exactly, exactly.
it's problematic. So um, I mean, having a minister for men um, is one of these things that pops up from time to time from elements of politics, but it the way it gets raised or gets run creates a different kind of discussion than the one that you and I have just had, which is the discourse is probably about equality, but it can get beaten up by all who participate in that discussion to the point where that gets ignored in favour of a spat along the way.
Yeah, and I think that the politicians are there to keep their jobs, and everything seems to get framed within a 30-second soundbite. And I've learnt over the past 6 months of COVID as well that it's always good to see the language on either side of that 30-minute soundbite to put it into context. So that's sort of where
Um,
I think we need to, be more. Well, it sort of fits into your Rorts and Riffop books as well, Tom. With if it sounds too good to be true, It just might be. So you've just got to make sure that you understand the context of everything.
Absolutely. Now, before we close off, there's a couple of deadline that some people are going to need to worry about. It is the 2nd of October. So those of you that haven't yet done your return and you're doing it yourself, you've got to the end of this month to get it into the ATO. Otherwise, you might get a knock on the virtual door, if you like, asking you where things are.
Oh, that's probably a little bit scare tactics. I think, Tom. I think the ATL have got enough of their hands full giving out COVID stimulus packages. But I think that it's always a good idea to make sure you have good compliance. As I've said in the past, that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that um, people have their tax returns all in order, affairs all in order. And in all honesty, if the tax office owes you money, even if you don't get it in by the 31st of October, you're probably still going to be okay. And look, no, as you know from your rorts and rip-offs that you've researched, the ATO are not going to ring you on a no caller ID number and say, "Give us your credit card because you've got to pay your tax bill because you haven't lodged your return." That's just not on and never going to happen. But as I said, it's always good to have your good compliance history, get everything going, and it's even good to just do your tax return to see if you're going to get a refund. You might as well have it in your pocket at the moment than not. And with the 1,000 up to $1,080 low medium income tax offset, that's the right one, I think, for certain taxable income levels, you're more likely than not to get a refund. So might as well get it in and get it in your pocket, I would say.
Yeah, that's not a bad bit of advice at the conclusion of this particular little potty. Lisa, thanks for joining me again.
Always a pleasure, Tom. And we didn't get too sidetracked this time. I think we had a few topics, but I don't think we got too philosophical. And I haven't mentioned the football, so I think I was doing well.
Okay. Well, the footy finals are coming up later in November.
No, they're on now.
Well, the actual grand final is going to be at the end of October, rather. Um,
We've
and
still got a holiday for it. Yeah.
yeah, we've still got a holiday
But
for it.
it's Happiness Day or something, isn't it? I can't
Is,
remember what
isn't
it's been
it,
reframed as.
isn't it Thank You Day?
Oh, yeah, that's sorry. Yeah, sorry. It might be Thank You Day.
It Thank You Day, and then the next day, Mike Brady sings Hump There Kazali in an empty MCG.
Correct.
So there's that.
Correct.
I think that next week, one of the things I'd like to touch on, Lisa, is before we close off, is actually look at the issue of how the ATO communicates with people. Because it's an important issue, and we haven't spoken about that yet. So it might be worthwhile looking at how the ATO communicates with people, what scams there are out there, and what people need to do to just keep track of what's been happening.
Well, yeah, exactly, Tom. And I mean, there's a lot of ad hoc phone calls. I remember I called you about 2 weeks ago or something, and saying I was about to get arrested by, no, it wasn't Homeland. I think they even said Homeland Security or something like that. And I've just looked and went, oh, I'm not pushing the one button for love nor money. But it was another number that I just blocked on my phone. So yeah, they're all the same root cause, but they just get a little bit more creative and try and scare people. And that's what upsets me from being a tax agent and tax practitioner. That the ATL aren't scary. You just got to open up the dialogue with them. But we'll talk about that next week.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad topic to go on, given that we mentioned that issue earlier. So thanks for joining me again. Thanks to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll get back to talking tax next week. Take care. Look after each other.